Hey guys, tonight we're peeling back the marble facade of the Roman Empire. Not the epic gladiator battles or heroic speeches carved in stone, but the real nitty-gritty. The kind of day that would leave you sweaty, blistered, and praying for modern plumbing. You're about to walk straight into the crumbling upper floor of a Roman insula, a rickety apartment block stacked sky high and held together with optimism and cheap timber. It's 4:30 a.m., and the city of Rome groans to life beneath your feet. Rats skitter in the walls. You're fairly sure something just dripped from the ceiling, but it's best not to investigate. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake on a straw mattress, which sounds rustic until you realize it's also your closet, pantry, and personal space, because all of that fits in 6 square feet. You squint toward the small slit of a window, which offers a lovely view of someone else's wall. The air reeks of stale oil, goat sweat, and yesterday's urine, because you don't have plumbing. No Roman insula does. Communal latrines are down 6 floors and across an alley that smells like a fermented shoe. As you grab your tunic, reused, itchy, probably from a dead cousin, someone upstairs tosses bathwater out their window. Surprise! You are now baptized with someone else's filth. Historians still argue whether these dumping habits were regulated by law or just tolerated with a shrug. With sandals strapped, you tiptoe down the creaking stairway, dodging loose boards and ducking laundry lines. Fires were frequent, deadly, and horrifyingly common in these buildings. In fact, Emperor Augustus set up a special fire brigade, but it mostly served the wealthier neighborhoods. Your building? Let's just say you keep a bucket of sand by the door. Out on the street, the noise is already relentless. Vendors shout over braying donkeys. Someone selling charred lentils as the emperor's favorite dish, and they might be joking, but it's unclear. You pass beggars, barbers, and a man with a monkey on his shoulder aggressively offering fortune readings. The monkey is the most hygienic thing on the block. You duck into a bakery because, miraculously, you have a job. Your fingers still ache from kneading dough yesterday. Bakers start early, often in dark cellars where the ovens roast both bread and spinal integrity. The heat is monstrous, and there's ash in your hair by 6 a.m. Fun fact, some Roman mills used donkeys or even prisoners to turn the grinding stones. You get the pleasure of human labor. Midway through your shift, someone brings in a rumor. The aqueducts are broken again. This means no clean water until they're repaired. And in some districts, repair means eventually. Rome's water system was a marvel of engineering, so brilliant that modern cities borrowed its concepts. But distribution wasn't equal, and the poor drank from public spouts that may or may not have been blessed by nearby sewage. By noon, your legs ache from standing, your stomach growls, and your lunch break is just some barley porridge eaten near a steaming vat. It tastes like sadness and 3-day-old garlic. You hear a loud clang. Someone's arguing over debts, gesturing with fists and accusations. The guards show up, but only to shake down both parties for bribes. One mainstream fact? Roman police weren't really a thing for citizens. Law and order? That was mostly DIY. Later, as you wander home past a statue of Jupiter, you notice the religious crowd assembling. Offerings are being made, flutes are playing, and someone in a bright cloak is bleeding a goat. Religion in Rome wasn't private or peaceful. It was mandatory, public, and strategically political. Skip a festival? Your neighbor might report you. And yes, the gods were everywhere, on coins, public buildings, even your bread. The line between devotion and social survival was thin razor. Back at the insula, you find a neighbor sobbing. Her husband slipped on sewage and broke his leg. No hospitals, no real doctors, just a guy with herbs and maybe a bronze scalpel. Oh, and Roman medicine sometimes involved crocodile dung or boiled mouse parts. Fringe detail? Some women rubbed mouse ashes on their cheeks to reduce wrinkles. The results were mixed. You climb back upstairs, feet heavy, back sore, and face smeared with soot and flour. Outside, someone shouting in Latin. Inside, a child screams. You curl back on your straw mattress and contemplate the empire, which gave the world magnificent roads, laws, architecture, and Latin. But for you, it's just another exhausting, filthy, and brutal day. And you probably wouldn't survive it.
You trudge back out into the baked Roman air at dawn. Your shift at the bakery was only step one. The real grind is just beginning. Today, you've been conscripted for labor near the construction site of a new bathhouse. Sounds relaxing? Not when you're hauling limestone blocks with twine that digs into your palms like a debt collector. You join a line of other citizens, men, women, and teenagers, each assigned to some joyless task that requires more muscle than morale. Roman labor wasn't clock in and clock out. It was sweat-based survival. The city was a mosaic of industries, blacksmiths banging out armor, leather workers tanning hides with urine. Yes, pee was a cleaning agent and even taxed. Historians still argue whether organized labor unions, collegia, offered genuine support or were just social clubs with ceremonial wine. You're placed near a cart full of bricks and told to load and stack. Easy enough until you realize the bricks are twice your forearm's width and you have approximately zero lifting technique. Your tunic sticks to your skin, your feet are dust-coated, and a foreman just yelled faster without looking up from his plum. Lunch break? Technically, yes, but you're expected to keep moving unless someone faints. There's barley gruel again, thicker today, which you optimistically call solid. You sip watered wine because clean water is rare, and while wine isn't hydration's best friend, at least it's less likely to give you dysentery. A fellow worker next to you grumbles that he used to be a scribe until his patron died and his social protection evaporated like bath steam. That's Rome. If your client dies or offends someone powerful, you're out of both a job and identity. Welcome to the sweat economy, where loyalty is currency and dignity is optional. One mainstream fact: Roman engineers pioneered pulley systems and cranes powered by human treadmills. You briefly get assigned to one. Imagine walking a hamster wheel, the size of a wine barrel, hoisting marble slabs in a slow, leg-burning spiral that feels oddly existential. There's chatter about a new aqueduct project underway. Aqua Triana, maybe? You squint toward the horizon, trying to spot its silhouette. That distant structure might one day carry clean water to your district, or just make a nice backdrop for a senator's villa. You're given a task no one wants: collecting sand near the Tiber River. The banks smell like algae stew, and your sandals sink into slimy deposits that cling like regret. A quirky tidbit? Romans used volcanic ash and lime to create concrete that could set underwater. The recipe? Still partly mysterious to modern science. Back at the site, you meet a bricklayer named Lucia who jokes she's training for the gladiator games. You laugh, but her biceps agree. She's a former slave, freed after saving her owner's life during a house fire. Now she stacks bricks and dreams of one day owning a spice cart. She smells faintly of rosemary and rebellion. Your final task is mortar mixing, which is essentially stirring sludgy goo in the sun while covered in flies. You discover the flavor of Roman resilience. It's chalky, semi-edible if desperate, and somehow gets into your teeth no matter what. As dusk approaches, you stagger toward home, dodging carts and collapsing under the weight of hours. Your hands throb. Your back has opinions. You pass a wealthy man's domus, where music drifts out. A lyre, laughter, grapes being hand-fed to someone reclining. You suppress the urge to yell, because envy is neither dignified nor safe. Before reaching the insula, a child runs up and offers you a clay amulet. It keeps away curses, she says very seriously. You buy it with a crumb of copper and hold it tight. And just like that, another back-breaking Roman day fades into torchlight. You're filthy, sore, and oddly proud. You've survived the sweat economy. Barely.
You don't believe in the gods. Not really. But belief here isn't private. It's performance art. And skipping it could land you in social exile or worse, misfortune blamed on divine wrath. So, you do what everyone else does. Join the crowd, toss incense, and mumble something halfway reverent. Welcome to Roman religion, where worship is mandatory, elaborate, and weirdly theatrical. The temple steps are slick with spilled wine. Priests in embroidered robes chant beside altars heavy with garlands and animal parts. A cow's head grins at you, unnervingly realistic. Someone hands you a sprig of laurel to wave in ritual solidarity. You're not entirely sure what it's warding off, but it smells nicer than the street. Above you, a high priest shouts into the crowd, invoking Jupiter, Mars, and Minerva in turns. The crowd responds like a trained chorus, which, fun fact, they often were. Religious rites in Rome weren't just spiritual. They were part of the public calendar, tied to politics, agriculture, and military campaigns. Miss one, and your neighbor might report you as impious. And impiety wasn't just a moral failing. It could be interpreted as a threat to the whole state. Historians still argue whether personal faith mattered or if Roman religion was all about ritual correctness. Your best guess, based on this goat bleeding into a bronze basin, is that spectacle wins. You're ushered forward to sprinkle grain onto the flames. The heat flashes, singeing your eyebrows slightly. Behind you, two young men whisper about a coming eclipse and whether it's a bad omen for the emperor. A quirky tidbit: Romans feared eclipses so much they'd clang pots and scream to scare off whatever devouring creature was hiding the sun. A woman nearby clutches a terracotta figurine of Diana, goddess of the hunt, and sobs quietly. You don't ask why. Everyone brings their ghosts to these rituals. You try not to bring yours. After the rites, there's a procession. You walk behind a gilded cart covered in embroidered banners, pulled by oxen wearing flower crowns,
It's lovely, hypnotic, and faintly ridiculous. Children toss petals, someone plays a reed flute. A senator rides by waving, casually flanked by 2 guards. He smells like frankincense and smugness. Religion here is state-sponsored pageantry. Yes, the temples are beautiful and the myths compelling, but they're also tools. Priests double as political advisors. Auspices are consulted before battles and court decisions. Even agricultural festivals were infused with power dynamics. If you slip and fall during a ritual, people gasp, not out of concern, but fear it might doom the harvest. Back on the street, the revelry continues. There's sweet wine, honey cakes, and roasted chestnuts. You snag a small pastry from a vendor and enjoy the 10 seconds of peace before someone spills something sticky on your robe. You wander past the temple of Vesta, where the Vestal virgins tend the eternal flame. You peer through the bars. Not too long, though. They're sacred and highly protected. Legend says if a Vestal lets the flame die, it's a cosmic catastrophe. The punishment? Buried alive. No pressure. A child asks you if you've ever seen a god. You pause, consider saying yes just to mess with them, but instead shrug. They're loud when they want attention. The child nods seriously and runs off, trailing ribbons and crumbs. You duck into an alley to escape the din. Behind the temple of Saturn, it's quiet. Just the faint gurgle of a runoff pipe and the distant clang of a blacksmith. You breathe, deep and unfiltered. Your sandals scrape pebbles. For a moment, it's just you. You don't believe in the gods, but you definitely don't want to tempt them.
Your foot brushes past a broken amphora, its clay shards still tacky with oil. Someone must have spilled it while sprinting away from debt collectors, soldiers, or just an angry baker having a bad day. You're about to find out just how lopsided the Roman justice system is. Spoiler alert, unless you're rich or your father once donated a villa to the Senate, you're on the wrong end of the stick. Let's say you accidentally knock over a merchant's display of olives. He screams bloody murder, grabs your arm, and drags you to the nearest praetor. You plead it was crowded and the ground was uneven. He says you're a thief. The judge? He's dining on fruit and barely lifts his gaze. Justice here is less Lady Justice with a blindfold, more impatient uncle with a political agenda. One mainstream fact. Roman law was incredibly advanced for its time. They had legal categories like contracts, property rights, family law, and more. But justice depended heavily on your social class. Patricians got trials. Plebeians got punishments. Slaves? Usually just pain. You're fined, despite 5 witnesses insisting you didn't steal. The merchant knew someone who owed the judge a favor, and that's enough. You try to argue, and a guard gently encourages silence with the hilt of a sword. Your fine's payable by labor or coin. Guess which one you're short on. As you leave, someone whispers, "Could have bribed him with figs." You're starting to wonder if fruit doubles as currency around here. You wander past a group of people crowded around a wooden stage. It's public punishment time. The condemned is a teen caught forging papers, now strapped to a post. He'll get 15 lashes, administered by someone who looks oddly thrilled. A quirky tidbit. Romans used different whips based on the crime. The flagrum was reserved for serious offenses and had embedded bone or metal. The teen gets the light version. Lucky him? Historians still argue whether public punishment was purely deterrent or entertainment. Crowds definitely jeer. Children toss scraps of food.
One person's shouting legal terms just to sound educated. You glance away. Your lunch is still in your stomach. For now. You're stopped by a patrolman. He says your tunic looks like military surplus. You explain it's just stitched from discarded cloth. He doesn't care. A senator's son recently got pickpocketed near the forum, and now guards are cracking down on suspicious attire. You're held for an hour while they ask pointless questions and eat roasted nuts. When they finally release you, one chuckles and says, "Just keeping the peace." Justice here means surviving the moment. An old woman nearby mutters about her neighbor being falsely accused of witchcraft. You're tempted to ask what counts as Roman witchcraft, but she's already vanished down an alley, her copper earrings flashing like secrets. You stumble into the shade of a law school where students debate old cases. One quotes Cicero, another references a case about a stolen mule. You listen in, awed by the knowledge and unbothered that it'll never apply to you unless you win a lottery or marry into a toga-wearing family. At home, your neighbor is crying again. Her husband's leg is worse. They tried visiting a local healer who suggested applying lizard fat and singing to Saturn. Fringe medicine, she says. Effective? Depends how much you believe in scaly miracles. You fall into your bed, bruised by the day's absurdity. Outside, Rome hums its uneven hymn. There's law, yes, but you're learning quickly. Not all laws were written for you.
The streets of Rome don't care if you're tired, sore, or spiritually bruised. They are a gauntlet of grime, noise, and opportunistic surprises. You step outside, eager for fresh air. Joke's on you, that air smells like boiled cabbage, animal dung, and something you can't identify but sincerely wish you could. There's a breeze, though, so mild mercy. The road is uneven. Crushed stone layered over mud, strewn with broken amphora shards and random bones. You dodge a cart barreling downhill, driven by a man with one eye and zero patience. A woman nearby curses him, and he shouts back in rhyming verse. Apparently, Roman insults were an art form. A quirky tidbit: some graffiti found in Pompeii includes poetic burns about baldness, bad wine, and friends who never paid back their debts. You inch toward the marketplace, wrapped in chaos and ambition. Sellers screech their offers. One claims his olives cure heartbreak. Another promises his sandals will make senators jealous. You don't believe either. Historians still argue whether Roman markets were regulated by official overseers or ruled by streetwise vendors with loud lungs and heavier scales. Someone bumps you. Your coin pouch is suddenly lighter. You spin around, no one's suspicious, everyone's busy, and you've learned pickpockets don't wear guilt in Rome. A nearby guard eyes you, clearly more interested in a bowl of honeyed figs than your theft woes. Justice, remember, optional. You trudge past bathhouses and taverns, sweat and steam escaping open windows like ghosts. The scent of grilled lamb makes your stomach growl. But street food isn't safe unless you know the vendor. Last week, a friend tried some dodgy fish. He hasn't stopped hiccuping and quoting Virgil since. Further on, you pass a tangle of alleyways locals call rat's maze. They're narrow, damp, and louder than you'd expect. Someone's playing a double pipe. Someone else is selling dream berries they swear cure sleepwalking. One woman cackles about her ex-husband being cursed by a stork. You decide not to ask. The streets shift in tone as you near the Suburra, Rome's seedy district. It's crowded with tenements and tiny shops selling everything from salted fish to scandalous scrolls. You catch glimpses of gamblers, actors, and a man dressed as Mars offering relationship advice. Mainstream fact: Rome's neighborhoods were shockingly diverse in class, race, and culture. You could hear African chants, Greek poetry, and Celtic lullabies within blocks. The empire was huge, and its streets echoed that expanse. Your sandals start slipping. Mud! Again! You find a rock to scrape it off, then realize it's part of someone's family altar. They yell, "You apologize," and scurry away. Religion blends into street life here. Every corner might be sacred or cursed. Probably both. A street performer drums on amphoras, juggling clay balls and reciting Emperor Claudius quotes in bad accents. People throw coins. You almost laugh. Almost. Near sunset, the street glows golden. Dust particles dance in the light. You dodge a horse, nod to a weary scribe, and step over a sleeping dog wearing a woven collar that says, "I bite poets." You reach home exhausted. Your tunic is stained, your hands are nicked, and you smell like 4 types of regret. You've survived the Roman street. Barely. You think you've clawed your way into some measure of stability. Maybe scored steady work, avoided suspicious tunics, paid off your olive fine. Think again. In Rome, social survival depends on how well you've mastered the art of patronage, a never-ending tightrope between loyalty and humiliation. Get ready to charm your way into protection or vanish into irrelevance. Morning starts with standing outside a domus, waiting for a man named Publius who once handed you an apple and now thinks he's Jupiter's cousin. He's a patron, which means he offers favors, advice, and connections to a select crowd of desperate hopefuls. You're one of them. The line is long. Everyone's clutching small gifts, a jar of anchovies, a roll of cheap cloth, a poem about his eyebrows. You brought dried figs. Bold move. Publius eventually emerges in a silk-trimmed tunic and an ego loud enough to wake the Senate. He waves like he's on a chariot. You bow slightly. Too much reverence is groveling, too little is a snub. You strike the middle ground and offer your figs. He grins and says something about Pluto's digestion. You pretend it's hilarious. Mainstream fact: the Roman patron-client system was the backbone of civic life. Clients received legal help, jobs, even meals. Patrons got loyalty, political support, and regular ego boosts. It was society's pyramid scheme with wine. You finally speak your request. Better work, fewer cart-hauling shifts, maybe a letter of recommendation. He nods vaguely, and then hands you a task. Deliver a scroll to his cousin across town. Fetch an exotic spice from a trader, and tell a senator his sandals were noticed. You're not sure what that means, but you smile and accept. Historians still argue whether patronage actually elevated the lower class or just kept them perpetually indebted. Based on your new to-do list, you vote for option B. You hike through districts with that scroll tucked in your tunic like it's made of gold. The cousin lives in a lavish villa with mosaic floors depicting mythic sea battles. You briefly envy a dolphin. After relaying your message, you're given a small pouch of cinnamon, your next delivery. You resist the urge to pocket it, not just because stealing's illegal, but because Publius would absolutely find out. Patrons always know. You pass under an arch where someone is loudly praising Neptune. A woman stops you and asks if you're delivering cinnamon to the baker near the forum. Apparently, the baker owes her money. You lie smoothly. Another survival skill Rome teaches fast. Back at Publius's house, you share your errand updates. He offers you a jug of watered wine and asks about your opinions on Cicero. You've read exactly one Cicero quote scribbled on a latrine wall. You say he's timeless. Publius nods approvingly. Then comes the moment. He mentions an overseer who needs help supervising a warehouse. He'll put in a word for you. Your breath catches. This could be actual progress or just another errand in fancier clothes. Either way, you thank him profusely and bow again. A quirky tidbit: patrons sometimes required clients to follow them in public, acting as cheer squads. You once clapped for a man after he picked grapes. True story. You return home and tell your neighbor about the new lead. She's impressed. She also asks if Publius needs mosaic cleaning. Everyone's fishing for favor, and Rome doesn't run on justice, it runs on connections. Your feet ache, your mouth tastes of fig residue, and your spirit's bruised from flattery. But tomorrow might be better. You've climbed one social rung. Only 37,000 to go.
You're no longer in Rome. You're squinting across a wind-swept plain where a warrior princess once sharpened her resolve like a blade. Her name? Rhodegon, from the mighty Parthian Empire, a civilization so fiercely independent, its leaders trained for diplomacy and battle in equal measure. But Rhodegon, she didn't just train, she vowed. The rebellion had torn her homeland like parchment in fire. Cities scorched, allies defected, and whispers of betrayal slithered through the royal halls. Rhodegon, still barely past adolescence, stood before her people in ceremonial armor and made one haunting promise. She would not wash her hair until the rebellion was crushed. Not a braid touched water, not a strand untangled. Her oath became legend, and her hair a living symbol of war. Historians still argue whether this vow was tradition, superstition, or raw psychological warfare. But one thing's clear: it worked. You join Rhodegon on a march across blistering hills. Her army moves in dusty silence. Dust and sandal straps binding warriors who wear bone amulets carved from their ancestors' keepsakes. At dawn, she addresses her troops with slow, deliberate words. Each sentence is weighty, not just commands, but affirmations. Let the wind be our witness. Let blood be our ink. You shiver, and it's not the cold. One mainstream fact: the Parthian military employed female strategists and squad leaders, a rarity in the ancient world. Rhodegon, however, wielded full authority. Her council included elders and mystics, but they deferred to her, not by protocol, but respect. You trek with her through a ruined village. Walls shattered, crops burned. The locals flock to her, offering plums, cloth, and tearful stories. She listens, then kneels to press her forehead to the dirt. A quirky tidbit: her signature ritual involved leaving strands of her hair in places where innocence had died, a woven map of sorrow and vengeance. At night, her tent is sparse. Just a wooden table, war scrolls, and a small basin she never touches. Her attendants whisper legends behind her back. One claims she awoke a dying soldier by chanting his name into embers. Another insists she never sleeps, just meditates with stone-cold eyes until dawn. Word spreads. Rebel leaders fear her. One even tried bribing her with a peace treaty and a golden comb. She returned the comb wrapped in ash. You ride with her toward a crucial battleground, a crescent valley nestled between two cliffs known as the Knives. She dismounts, braids her hair tight, and paints her face with soot. Her voice cuts through wind. We stole our breath, we exhale thunder. The battle begins at dusk, and you almost don't see her move. She's a blur between horses, striking, commanding, defending her flank with the agility of someone possessed. She takes down 3 rebel riders with a spear toss, so precise you question physics. Her army wins. It's not just victory, it's punishment. Afterwards, Rhodogon walks alone to a river. Her soldiers gather, silent. She kneels, unties her hair, and submerges it, every knot soaking in triumph. The water turns dark, rippling with ash and oil. Some say the rebellion ended that night. Others say it ended the moment she refused shampoo. You don't know how much of her legend is truth, but you do know this. Rhodogon wasn't a myth. She was a storm braided into human form.
You stand beside Rhodogon at dawn. The wind carries smoke, not from battle, but from the ritual fires that light the valley. Today is not for swords alone. Today is for omens, for curses, for glimpses into the unknown. Here in the Pathian highlands, before charging into war, soldiers look not just to their generals, but to symbols carved into animal bone, to the flight of hawks overhead, to the shifting shadows cast by sacred fire. Rhodogon kneels before a trio of mystics cloaked in amber thread. They hold bowls filled with ash, wine, and dried petals. One murmurs, "The blood moon lingers," while another traces shapes on her wrist with a burnt reed. Historians still argue whether these pre-battle rites were invented to soothe nerves or genuinely believed to sway fate. Either way, no warrior dares skip them. You breathe in the acrid scent of burning laurel. Rhodogon lets the smoke bathe her face, eyes closed. Nearby, her horse stamps nervously. A bad sign, or maybe just flies. A quirky tidbit: Pathian scouts carried a pouch of crushed beetles, said to attract birds that flew truest toward victory. You pretend not to see one being sprinkled on Rhodogon's saddle. The crowd quiets as an oracle approaches. A child no older than 12, head shaven, lips stained blue from whispering over elderberry leaves. Rhodogon asks no questions. She simply tilts her head, allowing the child to speak. The river weeps ash. The sun will blink. The tiger knows your sorrow. You blink. That's either poetic brilliance or mystical nonsense. Rhodogon nods solemnly, as if given coordinates to destiny. Mainstream fact: many ancient societies believed battle success hinged on divine timing. From Roman augurers reading bird patterns to Persian astrologers mapping star alignments, it wasn't enough to be strong. You had to be cosmically aligned. Rhodogon mounts her horse, flanked by warriors chanting low and rhythmic. Each carries a charm, some carved from obsidian, others wrapped in animal sinew. These aren't decorations,
Their armor for the soul. The march toward the knives begins again. You pass through a grove of twisted cedars, known locally as the Whispering Teeth. Rumor says those trees once marked burial sites for traitors. Rhodogon nods at them, as if recognizing old pain. She stops midway, unsheaths her blade, and strikes it against a stone with a scream that reverberates through every chest. Let mourning pass through fire. Let vengeance walk the wind. The army responds with roars. You feel it in your ribs. This isn't pageantry. This is transformation. The omens multiply. A hawk dives into mist without flapping. A branch snaps with no wind. A soldier collapses after touching a charm that wasn't his. Rhodogon walks past each sign with the calm of someone who's already lived the outcome. You arrive at the valley. Her generals pace like wolves. Rhodogon dismounts, crouches, and draws in the soil. Not tactics, but symbols, circles and arrows, vines and flames. One general asks if that's a battle plan. Rhodogon replies, it's the memory of victory. The ritual concludes with silence. No war cries yet, just tension, thick as braided rope. Rhodogon retreats to a small plateau, alone, where she lights one final fire. Into it, she tosses strands of her hair, flakes of ash from the previous battle, and a bead shaped like a snake. You watch as the smoke rises straight, unbroken. That's the sign she wanted. She walks down without ceremony, raises her spear. The storm begins.
You're on horseback now, the earth beneath pounding with hooves and urgency. The sun stretches thin over endless steppe, the land of the Masagard, fierce and mobile like flame on dry grass. Here rides Queen Tomias, a figure carved from legend and vengeance. Her fur-lined cloak snapping behind her like a banner of defiance. Cyrus the Great, yes, the same one you've heard whispered about in museum halls and history lectures, proposed marriage. She declined, not gently. What happened next? War. The Masagard weren't an empire of marble. No census, no senate, no frescoed bathhouses. They lived by the bowstring and horse pulse. Tomias led with instinct and fury, outmaneuvering the Persians across plains so vast they swallowed ambition whole. One mainstream fact, the Masagard were part of the Scythian nomadic groups, known for horseback archery so precise it unsettled even seasoned Persian cavalry. She ordered scouts to burn Persian supply lines and leave false trails. Pure strategic mischief. Her army feasted on fermented mare's milk, braided charms into horse manes, and painted symbols on shields you wouldn't understand, but would feel uneasy looking at. Historians still argue whether Cyrus underestimated her or overestimated his own myth. What's clear? She baited him into overextension. He sent his son to capture her. She sent him back in pieces. Cyrus responded with full force. That night, under moonlight and cloud whisper, Tomias sent a lone horse into the Persian camp with a scroll tied to its saddle. Come find me. He did. You're galloping with her through thorny windbreaks, watching her eyes narrow with calculation. Her camp is minimalist. Tools, maps etched into leather, a fire crackling beside an altar of bone and bronze. A quirky tidbit, her war advisors included elderly archers who claimed to shoot straighter while singing ancestral dirges. You watch one bury an arrowhead first into a log, humming like death with rhythm. Battle dawns as Cyrus finally arrives. His army glitters. Ptolemaios waits. No speech, no flourish, just a raised hand. The ambush is perfect. Riders flank from east and west, while Ptolemaios leads the central surge, her blade catching the morning light like prophecy. Spears shatter shields, horses scream, the Persians falter. And Cyrus? He falls. Ptolemaios finds his body, stares silently, and orders it buried with a massagard ritual. Wrapped in horsehide, set adrift on a fire-laced raft. No trophy, no coronation, just closure. They say she wept only once, alone, with only the wind to witness. You wouldn't have survived this era, but you might have bowed to her without shame.
You ride through victory's echo, the blood-dampened soil still warm under your horse's hooves. But Queen Ptolemaios doesn't celebrate. She studies the horizon like someone who knows joy is fleeting, especially for leaders carved by sorrow. Cyrus may be gone, but the Massagetae haven't won peace. Not yet. You camp beside her as night falls, fires dotting the steppe like constellations misplaced. Ptolemaios sits cross-legged on a worn fur rug, tracing patterns in the dirt with her dagger. You think she's drawing strategy until you notice the symbols. They match those found carved into the bones of her fallen warriors, tucked inside braided pouches. She's memorializing them, not in speech, but in sign. One mainstream fact: nomadic tribes like the Massagetae didn't bury their dead the Roman way. Bodies were burned, dismembered, or released into rivers, depending on status and belief. Mourning wasn't quiet, it involved ritual chants, galloping processions, and offerings to sky gods. Ptolemaios doesn't cry. Instead, she summons her 3 senior captains. They kneel, lay out maps marked with soot and berry dye, and speak through clenched jaws. Their losses were heavy: 40 riders, 2 scouts, a favored war dog named Tyron. She stares at the list, then carves a line through Cyrus's name, slowly. Historians still argue whether her grief shaped the next decade of Massagetae tactics. Some say she turned colder, favoring long-range ambushes over direct clashes. Others claim she began to dream of permanent settlements, a nomadic queen yearning for stone. Her legacy is blurry, filtered through Greek scribes with selective pens. The next morning she gathers her troops and rides to the burial ground. It's vast, marked by stones and wolf skulls placed at cardinal points. Everyone dismounts. No drums, no chants, just silence. Ptolemaios walks to each grave and drops a thorn blossom. A quirky tidbit: in Massagetae tradition, thorn blossoms symbolized pain remembered but not repeated. They grew wild on battlefields, and it was said they only bloomed where truth had been spilled. She turns, raises her dagger toward the sky, and lets the sun catch its edge. We are ash that refused to scatter. The army echoes her words, fists raised, but no celebration follows. Riders retreat to tents, horses fed, arrows sharpened. That night she eats alone,
roasted boar and fermented milk, her only companions a weathered horse comb and a silver ring given by her mother. You ask her, gently, what comes next. She doesn't answer directly, just watches the fire, then says, survival.
You drift south now, away from queens and empires, into a quieter rhythm, one that buzzes, hums, and flutters in gold. Welcome to ancient Egypt, where bees weren't just insects, they were sacred messengers, divine workers in the service of gods, medicine, and myth. Today, you'll join a raft on the Nile, drifting past papyrus reeds and sun-bleached stones in search of the world's first organized beekeepers. Your guide is a priest from Heliopolis, robes fluttering, arms stained with honey. He holds a clay pot like it's a holy relic, because it is. Bees were said to be tears of Ra, the sun god, fallen to earth and given wings. That's not just poetic, it's foundational belief. One mainstream fact: pharaohs considered bee symbols worthy of royal seals. The title Bee King once denoted rulership of Lower Egypt. You reach a floating apiary. Yes, floating. The Egyptians crafted hives from woven baskets and baked mud, setting them on rafts to drift among the reeds. The idea was clever. The bees stayed cool in the heat, and the Nile breezes discouraged pests. You trail your fingers in the water while the priest gently hums a hymn believed to soothe the bees. Historians still argue whether this practice was genuine apiculture or ceremonial symbolism. Either way, the bees seem very calm. A quirky tidbit: ancient Egyptians believed honey cured everything, from digestive troubles to wounds and even spiritual ailments. Their recipes included honey blended with crocodile fat or mixed into eye salves, some oddly effective, others less so. You watch as a healer applies honey to a soldier's cracked heel, murmuring blessings between dabs. The priest invites you to observe the harvesting ritual. He lights incense to mask human scent, then cracks open a hive with careful hands. The honeycomb glistens, amber, sticky, fragrant. Bees buzz but don't attack. It's almost reverent. He scoops the honey into small alabaster jars, each marked with a glyph: a bee, an ankh, a ripple of water. These will be sent to temples, households, and tombs. Honey was used in embalming too, preserving bodies and sealing their transition to eternity. You paddle downstream to a village where honey is currency, medicine, and sweet indulgence. Children chase bees for fun. Elders place wax on cracked pots to make them watertight, and bakers drizzle honey on flatbread like royalty. You sit beside an apiarist who speaks of queen bees like priestesses. He notes their size, their grace, and how they decide the fate of the hive. If she is calm, the people thrive. You nod, not because you're an expert, but because it sounds true. The sun sinks into the Nile and the buzz fades.
You've witnessed something quietly powerful, an ancient society that saw the bee not as a nuisance, but as sacred order. It hums still in your ear and memory.
You're drifting east now, into the layered complexity of ancient Mesopotamia, a civilization built from mud brick and mathematics, ziggurats and zodiac charts. But tonight, you're on a quieter trail, following bees through the corridors of early law, trade, and sacred order. Beekeeping here wasn't just practical, it was protected by the state. Get ready to examine a society where stealing honey might cost you your hand. You begin in the market square of Ur, where vendors hawk clay tablets, goat cheese, and bundles of honeycomb wrapped in palm fronds. A scribe shouts prices, noting purity grades as if he's selling wine. One mainstream fact: the Code of Hammurabi, that ancient legal monolith, includes penalties for stealing beehives. The punishment? Severe. Sometimes fines, sometimes physical. You wander past a small apiary nestled beside a granary. The hives here are horizontal clay tubes, stacked like scrolls. Bees flit in and out with business-like precision. A beekeeper spots you, raises a brow, and gestures toward a wooden sign, "Do not disturb the workers." His tone is half warning, half pride. Historians still argue whether Mesopotamian bees were domesticated in large numbers or simply managed from wild colonies. The surviving tablets hint at both: contracts for honey exchange, oaths sworn over wax seals, even temple donations marked by jars of amber sweetness. You sit with a priestess from the Temple of Ishtar, who speaks of honeyed tongues as a divine gift. In rituals, honey was offered to gods in libation or poured into sacred basins representing fertility. A quirky tidbit: some ceremonies featured honey-drenched bread, shaped like bees, left in altars overnight to invite the spirits to feast. She presses a wax tablet into your palm, a message sent from one merchant to another, a shipment of beeswax destined for a cosmetics maker. Wax here isn't just for candles, it's face cream, letter carrier, and weatherproofing agent. You feel its cool texture, etched with cuneiform that hums ancient intent. Nearby, a child cries, his foot stung by a wayward bee. A healer arrives, dabs the area with palm oil, then applies a paste of honey and clay. "Soothes venom," he mutters, quoting a line from a text older than the brick beneath your sandals. You're invited to observe a honey measurement, where an official dips a carved stone ladle into a jar and weighs its contents on a scale balanced with barley. Accuracy matters. Too little honey and temple donations are void. Too much? Suspicion of fraud. As dusk paints the sky in rust and rose, you attend a quiet ceremony. A priest anoints a statue with honey, singing praises of abundance and protection. Bees hum in the background, unintentionally part of the hymn. You exhale slowly. In Mesopotamia, the hive wasn't just buzzing. It was embedded in law, woven into trade, and whispered into prayer.
You're climbing now,
into the highlands of Anatolia, where the ancient Hittites once ruled with bronze blades and rituals thick as mountain fog. It's cooler here, the air stirred with pine and prophecy. Tonight, you're not here for war or kings. You're here for bees, or more precisely, the sacred swarms that the Hittites revered, feared, and on occasion tried to bribe. You arrive at a ceremonial clearing, marked with stone circles and bits of wax. A priest stands at the center, garbed not in gold or silk, but simple wool laced with amber threads. He holds a shallow dish of honey, not for eating, but for entreating. The Hittites believed bees were divine intermediaries. Mainstream fact: ancient Hittite texts describe formal rituals involving bees as agents to carry prayers or curses between worlds. You watch as the priest chants in Hittite, reciting lines that shimmer with metaphor. Fly to the sky realm, stitch the soul, taste the wound. He places the dish at the altar's edge. Minutes pass, then a hum. A single bee arrives, circling like it's considering a sacred contract. You don't breathe. Historians still argue whether this was coincidence or part of a conditioned swarm response. Skeptics suggest the bees were attracted by nearby hives. Believers point to millennia-old texts that describe summoning songs. You choose wonder. The ceremony continues. A quirky tidbit: in one recorded Hittite ritual, a bee was buried alive beside a criminal's belongings to seal their misdeeds into the earth. It sounds morbid, until you realize the bee wasn't the punishment, it was the messenger. Later, you visit a honey cave carved into hillside rock. Inside, wax figures, stone jars sealed with wax, and a wall carving of a winged woman mid-flight. Some claim she represents a bee goddess, others suggest a shaman in trance. The carving hums with quiet power. A Hittite healer shows you how wax was blended with crushed herbs to treat arrow wounds. It's thick, warm, and smells like thyme. You wonder how many warriors wore bees on their skin without realizing. You share a meal with locals: flatbread, goat cheese, and a drizzle of honey aged in clay. As you eat, a child asks if bees speak. You say, yes, softly, in whispers we haven't yet learned to translate. That night, in your tent beneath the stars, the buzzing never fades. It becomes a lullaby. The Hittites didn't just live among bees, they invited them into spirit and silence, into healing and hex. And they're still listening.
You step onto a marble threshold now, into the curious, buzzing minds of ancient Greece. Here, bees aren't just nature's sugar artisans. They're philosophers, poets, and mini demigods fluttering through myth and medicine. You're in Athens, circa 400 BCE, eavesdropping on a symposium where honey isn't dessert, it's doctrine. The first thing you notice? A jar of melly, golden and thick, perched beside scrolls and clay cups.
One mainstream fact: Hippocrates, the father of medicine, prescribed honey for fever, wounds, and even mood regulation. He called it a cleanser of sores and promoter of warmth. You sip some just to feel wise. Around you, scholars debate everything from bee politics to soul nectar. Yes, soul nectar. Plato once referenced bees as allegories for the human soul, buzzing in harmony or discord based on virtue. Historians still argue whether he believed in literal bee reincarnation or was just being metaphorically cheeky. You wander to an apiary tucked behind a courtyard. Greek hives are cylindrical and made from woven wicker or hollow logs. The bees here are polite, at least compared to Roman ones. A philosopher named Doron tells you, to observe a hive is to glimpse democracy. You nod, not because you agree, but because he's holding a scroll on bee voting rituals. A quirky tidbit: Greek thinkers believed the queen bee was male, a notion debated endlessly until someone finally peeped under the metaphorical toga and figured things out. Even Aristotle got it wrong, calling the queen the king bee. Oops. You join a physician at work. He's grinding dried figs and honey into a paste for gout. It's warm, sticky, and smells oddly festive. He slathers it on an old man's swollen toe, muttering, "The sweetness deceives pain." You ask if that's a saying? He replies, "It is now." Nearby, a playwright jots notes for a comedy involving bees suing the sun for stealing their light. You laugh. He's serious. At the agora, you witness honey as currency. Traders offer combs laced with thyme or saffron. One merchant boasts his bees hum in hexameter. You suspect the claim is unprovable, but appreciate the poetry. A temple maiden places a wax seal on a prayer tablet, marking it with the glyph for Artemis, goddess of wilderness and protector of bees. You watch her bow lightly, lips moving in an ancient dialect. The wax glows faintly. Maybe superstition, maybe divine receipt. You dine with a family that mixes honey into lentil stew. Their child buzzes around the table, pretending to be a bee. "I collect joy," she announces. You applaud her thesis. As the stars rise above olive groves, you sit quietly, brushing wax from your fingertips, feeling the soft mental hum of Greek thought. To them, bees were moral, medicinal, mysterious, a mirror of human complexity in miniature wingspan. And tonight, their wisdom sticks, just like the honey between your teeth. You descend back into Rome, into stone corridors echoing with Latin and ambition. Tonight, you're visiting the final stage of this honeyed journey, the Roman Empire's grand affair with beekeeping. A world not of mystery, but method. Rome was order, expansion, and systemized sweetness. If Egypt, Mesopotamia, and Greece revered bees spiritually, Rome filed them under agriculture. You arrive at a villa's rear courtyard, where an apiary is laid out with geometric precision. Rows of hives carved from hollow logs, clay urns stacked like amphorae, and attendants in tunics, each with beeswax smeared on their hands like armor. One mainstream fact: Roman author Varro described optimal hive placement, sun exposure, and even seasonal bee behavior in his agricultural treatises. This wasn't hobby, it was economy. The head beekeeper, Marcus, greets you with a scroll and zero patience. He's tracking pollen sources, hive productivity, and drone population. You glance at his tally marks. They rival a census. Bees are taxed, counted, bred, and harvested with a precision that screams empire. Historians still argue whether this system birthed modern apiculture or simply refined older traditions. Either way, Rome's buzz echoed far. A quirky tidbit: elite Romans sometimes kept bees indoors, encased in stone chambers with fluted openings for flight. One senator claimed his bees preferred Bacchus-themed wallpaper. You suspect exaggeration, but admire the commitment. You observe honey extraction. Marcus uses smoke, not prayer. His crew wears netted veils and leather cuffs. Each jar is labeled: origin, flavor, medical grade. Honey was used for everything: wound salves, digestive aid, perfume base, wax tablets for writing, and even as food for sacred geese. You peek into the storage chamber. There, beeswax bricks are stacked alongside amphorae. A scribe explains that wax seals mark official documents, while beeswax figurines are offered to temples during festivals. Rome doesn't just farm bees, it weaves them into infrastructure. Marcus shows you the Queen's Selection Scroll, a list of preferred breeding traits: fast flyers, gentle temperament, high yield. You glance at the candidates. Names like Aurelia Minor and Flavia Buzzia. You admire the drama. In the forum, merchants sell comb-wrapped cheeses, honeyed nuts, and skin balm labeled Venus's Glow. One claims his bees are fed on rose petals and Gregorian chants. You suspect sarcasm. You lunch on wheat cakes brushed with thyme honey, served beside tangy olives and thick goat's milk. A child nearby dips her bread and whispers, "This tastes like summer." You agree. As the sun fades behind aqueduct arches, you walk through one last orchard where bees swirl among fig blossoms. A scholar nearby recounts the myth: the soul becomes a bee in death, journeying between realms. You smile softly. Rome may have lacked mysticism, but it honored the bee with roads, law, and legacy. And it still hums, sweet, structured, and eternal.
Let your breath slow now. The bees have returned to their hives, the queens to their chambers, the warriors to their tents, and the humble baker to their soot-stained pillow. Across empires and epochs, you've followed echoes of honey, sandal steps through muddy alleys, prayers carried on wings, and vows braided into war. every place we've wandered tonight, from the fire-trap insula of Rome to the sacred apiaries of Egypt, was stitched together by survival, belief, defiance, and sweetness. Your shoulders may ache from imagined labor, and your mind may still hum with Rhodogon's vow or Tomuse's thistle offering. But let it fade gently now. Picture the Nile at dusk, bees hovering just above the water, reflecting stars, as if deciding which ones they'll whisper to tonight. In the quiet moments of history, beneath all the dirt and clamor, there was always one thing that endured: connection. Between queen and soldier, between child and charm, between beekeeper and divine. So rest easy, listener. Let your dreams meander through ancient streets and smoky rituals, through tombs scented with honey and scrolls inscribed with hope. Whatever swarms at the edge of thought tonight, let it soften, slow, and find its way home. Sleep deep, wake curious.